Hey vinyl community, I wanted to do a quick video today to talk about my top 15 concept albums of all time. Now this is a monumental task and you're never going to make everybody happy. You're never going to get everybody to agree on a list of the top 15, but I'm going to give you mine. Again, I am not in any way saying this is the definitive list. I got a lot of comments when I did my top 10 progressive rock songs saying you forgot this one, or what about this band, or how could you have left this band off of here? I'm just giving you my favorite bands that I am familiar with, the concept albums that I have heard, in my own personal opinion, what my favorite top 15 are. You may agree, you may not agree. That's what the comment section is for, as long as you're respectful. Let me know what your top 15 would be. I'm gonna try and make this video not too lengthy, so I'm not going to get into an in-depth analysis of each album, but I am going to give you my top 15 list. So I do want to talk about what constitutes a concept album when I am compiling my list. So the criteria that I use is basically a concept album is a collection of songs that tie into a general theme. And each of those songs in one way or another represents a part of that theme or follows the general concept. If it's a story, in some cases these are stories, what we might call them rock opera has been one term that's been used, or there is a general storyline that's woven throughout the album. In other cases, it's just an album where all the songs tie into the same theme. There's an established theme, and each song is a different representation of that theme, or in some way speaks to that theme or addresses that theme. Number 15, I am going to choose Frank Zappa, Joe's Garage, Acts 1, 2, and 3. Just a great album all the way through. It has elements of so many different styles of music. Frank Zappa, of course, is one of the most dynamic and gifted performers of his era. And this is an album I think that will appeal to most fans. There's so many different styles of music. He jumps around from style to style, and yet it all ties together into a pretty interesting story. It's definitely a story that only Frank Zappa could tell, and it's definitely from the mind of Frank Zappa, but I enjoy it a lot. I think that if you are still discovering Frank Zappa, this might not be a bad place to start. It is Frank Zappa in all of his glory, and there is a lot to like here. Number 14, I'm going to choose the Kinks are the Village Green Preservation Society from 1968. Definitely one of the best albums by the Kinks, if not their best album. There is so much excellent songwriting, melodies, hooks. Just all these songs are great. It's everything you love about the Kinks but haven't heard on the radio. It's really one of their most undiscovered gems. And it's a great album because some of the other albums on this list, you've heard them on the radio, you've heard them played over and over and over again, and you're probably sick of some of them. But with the Kinks are the Village Green Preservation Society, there's not that risk of over familiarity. Thematically, it's a very English sounding album. It's little vignettes about English life. There's character studies, and there's some very British topics and elements here. But the songs are so well structured. They have such great melodies. Even if you can't connect to the fact that this album is so very British, you will enjoy the songs. If you love the Kinks, you are going to adore this album if you haven't heard it already. Number 13, Kiss, Music from the Elder. Oh my God, how could you pick this album? Isn't this the album that all Kiss fans hate? That's not exactly true. Now, it doesn't always sound like a Kiss album. In some spots it does, but I think the charm in it is that Kiss actually tried something different. They went in a different direction. Now, you could argue maybe that it was a little over ambitious. Maybe they had no business trying a rock opera or concept album of this scale, but they were working with Bob Ezrin, who they worked with very successfully on their Destroyer album, and they thought they could pull it off. Bob Ezrin had just produced the Pink Floyd's epic The Wall album, and Kiss was hoping that he could work the same magic for them. he did and he didn't. I think there's some great songs here. I think overall the album is very enjoyable. It holds together well as a concept. It's an easy story to follow, but certainly it is, if you're a Kiss fan and you haven't yet heard this album, you're in for a bit of a shock because you've got Gene Simmons singing a ballad about a world without heroes. You've got Paul Stanley singing in a very falsetto voice, almost like Roger Daltrey did on some of his Tommy tunes. But to me, it's an enjoyable album. I do listen to this and I like it. Certainly, it could have been better, but Kiss gives it their best shot. And I think that you come away with a very enjoyable, still hard-rocking album, but I have to give Kiss some credit for trying it, and I think for the most part it works. Number 12, the Moody Blues, Days of Future Past. Of course, this is a suite of songs about a day in the life of an ordinary person. You go from dawn all the way to nighttime, and it's very melodic. I love the orchestra. The orchestra adds so much to the songs. It's almost like a ballet or truly like a rock opera in spots, but I enjoy the heck out of it. It, to me, is one of the Moody Blues' most enjoyable albums. It works together brilliantly as a concept, and I think the world of it. Number 11, Elton John, Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy. Now, this basically is an autobiographical account of Elton John and Bernie Taupin's earliest days as singer-songwriting team extraordinaire before they actually made it famous. There's only one huge hit on this album, so it hasn't been overplayed to death. Someone Saved My Life Tonight is a great, excellent Elton John song. The rest of the tracks have not been overplayed on FM radio. You've got the title track, you've got Bitter Fingers, Tell Me When the Whistle Blows, Gotta Get a Meal Ticket is great. Curtains is a great way to close out the album. There's just something special about this album. And for me, it's Elton John's last great album of the 1970s. I like Rock of the Westies, but I don't think consistently it was as great as some of his earlier 70s albums. But Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy, it's a great concept and it's interesting storytelling. Songs are great, melodies are there, the hooks are there. And I think if you're an Elton John fan, of course, you probably love it to death also. Number 10, Genesis, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Now, don't even ask me to get into what the story is about. I know it's about a Puerto Rican boy named Rael and his adventures of self-discovery, and a lot of weird crap happens to him. Peter Gabriel was such an eccentric character, and his storytelling also was very unique, very otherworldly, very adventurous and sci-fi and fantastic. So don't worry too much about trying to follow the story because you will not. A lot of it is not going to make sense. But the songs here are so solid. There's such a diversity of styles. It's everything Genesis did best. You've got some of the old, real prog rock stuff. You've got some of the sounds that Genesis would eventually move towards in the Phil Collins era, but it is just a great album. It's Peter Gabriel's last album with Genesis, and he definitely went out on a high note. Number 9, Pink Floyd, Animals. So the concept of this is it's loosely based on George Orwell's book Animal Farm, and Roger Waters has taken some of the songs that they had, which were floating around since after the Dark Side of the Moon album, and he has worked them into a song suite about anti-capitalism. There are the dogs, who are the vicious soldiers and the henchmen, and then you have the pigs, who are either religious leaders or corporation leaders or capitalists or government, whoever it might be. They are running the show. And then you've got the sheep, who are basically the mindless worker bees who are just going around not really questioning authority or questioning what's going on around them. And then, of course, in the final epic track, Sheep, the sheep rise up and defeat the dogs and the pigs, and everyone lives happily after, presumably. But it is such a great suite of songs. Dogs, definitely one of David Gilmour's finest moments. He shreds on guitar that entire song. So many great guitar solos, so many great moments from Rick Wright. Such great songwriting and lyric writing from Roger Waters. Can't go wrong with Pink Floyd. It's definitely their darkest album by far, and I love it. Number 8, Jethro Tull, Thick as a Brick. Of course, this is a parody of the whole progressive rock movement, the pretentiousness that surrounded not only progressive rock, but the music business in general, where music was in the 1970s. He takes pot shots at music critics, at other musicians, at himself. So it's really an entertaining and enjoyable song cycle here. And if you love Jethro Tull, you'll love this album. They sliced off the beginning of it for radio, but the rest of the album is just as enjoyable, just as proggy, just as phenomenal as the part that you may have heard on the radio. Number 7, I am picking The Who, Quadrophenia. Got to get some Who in here. Definitely The Who excelled at the concept album. Of course, Quadrophenia is a tale of a mod youth. I don't pretend to know too much about the history of mods and rockers in the early 60s in Great Britain, but you had the mods, you had the rockers, and they were always at war with each other. And so Jimmy is a mod, and he, like many other protagonists in other rock concept albums, is on a journey of self-discovery. He's taking drugs. His family has let him down. He's disillusioned with authority and school and his friends and the mod movement in general. And so it, over the course of the double album, tells his tale. But so many great, phenomenal Who songs on here. You got The Real Me, Love Reign O'er Me, Punk and the Godfather, 515, Bellboy, just track after track. The Who have never sounded better. They are playing their asses off on this song, and it is a great, phenomenal concept album. It's an easy concept to understand, even if you can't necessarily relate to the struggle of the mods versus the rockers. It's The Who, it's Pete Townsend, and he's a great storyteller, and his songs are phenomenal. Number 6, I am going to pick Dream Theater, Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory. This is one of the most extraordinary concept albums you will ever hear, not only because of the subject matter. It's really kind of a murder mystery. It's got some reincarnation elements to it. It's just such a fascinating, such an original story. The playing on this album is just phenomenal. If you love hard rock, if you love progressive rock, Dream Theater is just knocking it out of the park on this album. And it is such an enjoyable, epic album to listen to. I think most people regard this as their best album, but it definitely is a brilliant concept album. Love the playing. I don't care if you're a fan of 70s rock, 80s rock, 90s rock. You will find something to love about this album. It is just brilliant, and I can't recommend it enough. Number 5, another Pink Floyd album, Pink Floyd The Wall from 1979, which follows the story of Pink, who's a burned-out rock star, still haunted by the loss of his father in World War II. He isolates himself, starts taking drugs, and gradually succumbs to mental illness. Then he begins thinking that he is a totalitarian leader of a fascist group called the Worms, and all hell erupts. But eventually, the wall, which is a metaphorical wall that he builds around him to isolate himself and disconnect himself from the rest of society, gradually that collapses, and we imagine that the protagonist has saved himself at the end of the, call it a rock opera for want of a better word. But so many great songs on here, and I know you've heard Comfortably Numb a million times, Hey You a million times, you've heard Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, Young Lust, but there are so many great Pink Floyd moments on here, and even the songs that are deeper tracks I really enjoy a lot. Don't Leave Me Now is a great track. I like Nobody's Home. So many great, great moments on this album that are undiscovered gems. And it's a story that's easy to understand. It's just visually, if you've seen the movie, that complements it very well. You've got the Gerald scarf illustrations and the gatefold that help lend some identity to the story. But I've always loved Pink Floyd The Wall. I know there's a lot of Pink Floyd fans who, now they don't regard it very highly, or they feel like, well, it's too much commercial Pink Floyd. But this was only one album removed from Animals, so it still retains some albeit minor progressive rock elements to it, but it is just a great suite of songs nonetheless, and I'm sticking up for The Wall. Number 4, Queensryche, Operation Mindcrime from 1988. This is a concept album, a rock opera, but it is a hard rock masterpiece. Even how many years on? We're talking almost 40 years on. Not quite 40 years, but let's say it's 35 and some, maybe not quite even 35, but nonetheless, it is a great, great album. It still sounds as fresh today as it did back then. If you love hard rock, if you love heavy metal, if you love progressive rock, if you just love rock in general, this is an album worth checking out. It, again, is a very interesting story. The protagonist is Nicky. He's a drug addict who becomes disillusioned with his corrupt society, and he falls in with this revolutionary group led by mysterious Dr. X, and just a lot of things happen in the story, but it keeps it interesting. The narrative moves along very well, and it is just a hard-rocking, great album. Number 3, I'm going with David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, one of David Bowie's most brilliant albums of the 70s. This was released in 1972. It concerns David Bowie's alter ego, the androgynous Ziggy Stardust, who is a bisexual rock star who is sent to Earth to save us from an impending apocalypse. And there's a lot of separate songs. You don't have to understand the narrative behind the songs to enjoy the album. You've got 5 Years, you got Suffragette City, of course, Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars is a great track, but just a great collection of songs from David Bowie, a great glam rock masterpiece, and a great concept album overall. Number 2, I'm going to go back to The Who for Tommy. Tommy is a story of Tommy Walker, who is a deaf, dumb, and blind boy, to use the Who's terminology. He loses his hearing, sight, and his ability to speak after suffering a childhood trauma. He's manipulated and abused by his family and discovers that he is able to manipulate vibrations enough that he becomes a champion pinball player. His mother takes him to a psychiatrist who suggests that she stick him in front of a mirror and have him stare into his reflection. He does that for so long, his mother gets annoyed, she smashes the mirror, and that frees Tommy of the bonds of his blindness and his muteness and his inability to hear. People are amazed, and they come and follow him, but then they end up rejecting his teachings. That's just a thumbnail sketch of the whole Tommy opera, but so many great Who tracks here. I'm Free, We're Not Gonna Take It, Pinball Wizard, Acid Queen, so many, track after track. I mean, this was 1969, and there are only 4 musicians on here, and yet it sounds like an army of musicians because it is so rich in sound. The songs are so well written, well crafted. The album drives the narrative forward in a way that's easy to understand, and it's just enjoyable through and through. My number 1 pick, Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon from 1973. I mean, what can be said about this album that hasn't already been said? It is a brilliant collection of songs with the theme of madness and what are the things that drives an individual into madness and the pressures of everyday life. You've got time, you've got money, the great gig in the sky, which represents the afterlife, and us and them, and just so many great moments on here. There's not a moment of silence on the entire album. It just flows brilliantly. It is great all the way through, and it is my number one favorite concept album of all time. Some honorable mentions that I threw in here would be the Who Sell Out. I didn't want to have too much Who stuff in my top 15. The Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, you could argue, belongs in here. I toyed with that, putting that in here, and I don't know, it just didn't make my list. I love it as an album, but in terms of a concept album, I'm not sure it holds together all the way. You've got Sloop John B, which doesn't have anything to do with the other, theme that might be woven through. So for me, Pet Sounds didn't totally work as a concept album. I'm trying to think if there were any others that I wanted to include here, but those were the ones that came to mind. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, I don't feel it was a true concept album. The Beatles never regarded it as a concept album, so I don't either. You could say Jethro Tull, Aqualung, but Ian Anderson never considered that a concept album. So I know there's going to be some that, oh, you should have put that on there, or what about this album? But this is my list. I wanted to keep it short, which I don't know that I necessarily succeeded. But anyway, hope you enjoy, and let me know in your comments what you think.